Welcome to Dominate Your Day podcast. This is the podcast that adds value to leaders who want to make a difference in the workplace. We believe each person is unique and has a purpose they can live out every day and make an impact in the world. Here at Dominate Your Day podcast, we hear stories from leaders who have used their unique talents to transform themselves and their companies from the inside out.
So welcome to Dominate Your Day. I have a really fun guest for y'all to hear today. She's actually here in Dallas. Her name is Sirisha Kuchimanchi, and Sirisha, you've done so many different things. You have as you call a trifecta, but spent most of your career at Texas Instruments, which is right here in Dallas, Texas. And she's also done some amazing things with serving young women that are getting out of college and getting into technology, as well as she's a professional speaker. She's an entrepreneur. She's also an investor. She has her PhD in material science and engineering from Carnegie Mellon. And she's an IEEE, is that right? A senior member, and holds a PMP certification. So Sirisha is very talented. And welcome to Dominate Your Day. We're glad to have you here today, Sirisha.
Thanks, Dana. It's really great to be on your podcast. It's something close to my heart, so thank you.
Well, you have so many areas, and you said you have a trifecta. So tell us your story. How did you step down from this amazing corporate job to now this entrepreneurial position where you're speaking all over the country, and you've got several things you're speaking on? So let's get into what kind of prompted you to go make this move, and something, probably your internal spirit saying, I'm ready to do something different. What happened? How did all that happen?
You're right. I had almost 18 years that I worked at TI, and during that itself, I had two career transitions. Before I joined TI, I had gone through a layoff, and then I'd actually been a stay-at-home mom for a few years. So this, I look at it as my third career break, maybe more permanent than a career break. Let's see how the transition's going. It's just been close to a year.
Wow.
And what prompted me was I was working full time. I was podcasting in the night, and my kids were in that high school years getting ready to go to college, and way too many balls in the air. I realized for me, time was the constraint. I mean, yes, making money is always something that we all, want to do as well, but managing finances on the side, for me, time became my biggest constraint. And I think there was a tipping point when I realized I was dropping too much stuff and I wanted to take a break. So I kind of smoothed into the transition. I asked for a leave of absence and was able to get it for some time. And it gave me time to think about it, what I wanted to do next. And it was a hard decision. It's not easy to step away from the corporate world because I liked my job. I liked people I worked with. It was very engaging. But also there was things I was interested in wanting to pursue and felt that this was the right time to do it. And we'll probably talk about this, and I keep talking about finances in the middle of this because there are financial implications to making decisions, and how do we kind of make that decision depends on that as well.
And I think you were wise to say, you know what, so many women out there right now, we know they're burnt out. 7 out of 10 are suffering in the workplace. And it's because they think they have to do it all and they can't get off the hamster wheel. And the fact that you said, I need a little sabbatical here and think about things, was pretty smart. So how did you get into, like, as you were taking that time off and thinking about what you needed for your well-being, how did the financial well-being kind of pop to the top? What in that kind of got you excited to then go back and start talking about and speaking about now?
So in the back, when I started working, obviously I'm an immigrant to the US. So when you're trying to figure out your finances, you don't have a lot of resources or a lot of knowledge. I mean, there are friends and family who might help you, but it's a pretty steep learning curve. I don't know. So, many of us kind of struggle to this sort of landscape. It's something that we may not want to spend time on. Like talking to a lot of women around me, it's either time, resources, sometimes the fear of managing money. But I had some missteps early in the way. When I was trying to transition through my layoff, I realized I'd gotten some not very good advice and made some really bad transactions. So that kind of forced me to start thinking about how to manage money. And I guess at the back of my mind, when I go look back, I've always had this plan to kind of retire early. No idea what that meant, but just the concept of having this choice. So it's been a very intentional decision of learning to manage my money. It's not something very complicated I do. My stuff is very simple, very basic, but I realized over time that that actually works for me. The more I complicate it, it just stresses me out. So I figure out what works for me, and I've been kind of looking at the numbers. And when I made this decision, when people ask me how do you make it, for me it was a very risk conscious decision. I knew what the risks and what the implications were, and decided that even then it was still a good timing for it. Because I mean, thinking about it, my kids are heading off to college, so in a lot of ways it's probably not the best time to do it, but to me it still seemed like the right time to do this. And having managed a lot of the other potential risk factors, I feel like it's good.
So, in the financial well being, and you've written a book about financial well being as well, right?
Yes, I just wrote it and people can find it on Amazon. The best place I think is to go to my website and figure out all the curated resources I have. It's called 12 Steps to Financial Independence. So it's written very simplistically. If, for someone like me, wanting to navigate this. So it could be for someone who is graduating college, someone who's stepping into the workforce, or someone who's, has never fully like intrinsically managed all of their portfolio. They might have done pieces of it, but it walks through step by step from money mindset to budgeting through basics of investing, even talking about will and trust, some negotiating, like every step, like net worth, like a guidebook. And it has exercises at the end of each. So ideally you want to go through it by step process, but you could pick it up where you want it and do it. So it's very well simplistically laid out for, I think, people to feel confident and have a roadmap for themselves.
So it sounds like you wrote this book for people like you that were like, I've got to get a handle on so that I can be independent and understand finances, and then create something that's easy for other people to navigate as they're managing their finances. Is that kind of what I'm picking up?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, as I was writing it, there were chapters that I realized I have to go back and revisit myself, because this is a
Hmm.
constant process, right? It's not like you can put it on a lot of auto mode, which is what it is, but there are things you have to revisit, your legacy planning. And do you do your annual sort of look back and look forward? What is the future look like for you? So there are parts that I have to go back myself and do. And there's a checklist in the back which says, yearly, what do you need to do in like a daily or a monthly basis. And it was written for me in a way. I also look at family members who are just entering the workforce, and I think it's meant for them because of a lot of the conversations I've had with them as well.
I love that, because you're kind of created it for you and people like you that are stepping out on their own, but also for those young entrepreneur or people that are just getting out of college and trying to figure out their career and how to manage their finances. So that sounds interesting. I guess with your college kids too, are they reading it? Are they are they paying attention to mom?
Well, we've had financial conversations for a very long time. So on and off, about deciding for college, little
Hmm.
things. The thing is, this is like a learning process, right? Until you have
Absolutely.
access to certain resources. So it's interesting you bring that up, because I did a TEDx talk, and it was actually about having conversations, money conversations with kids, and it's about how do you start early. This book is for a certain age group, but I think the earlier you start, if you have the opportunity, like 5, 6, in different ways, it just builds that muscle in a way for us, because most of it we learn through childhood. Sort of these money stories we are told, and it's something to be reframed. And though the book is written for a certain audience, it could also benefit someone who's like, I have a few friends who are have as much work experience as I have, but have not actually got a hold of their financial picture. And it could be for
Mm,
someone just walking through there as well. If
I
you think
love
like now you have the time to do this.
I love that. I think it's not, being able to create it in a resource in a way that helps, whether it's a student or a child. What is the biggest takeaway that you want people to take away, either from your TED talk or from your book, as they think about financial well-being?
Not to be scared of it. I think most of us, it seems to be like, this is my personal experience, and I hear this sometimes from people, so I'm not broad brushing stroke it, but I think one of it is many of us feel this sort of pit in the stomach fear. Like I was talking to this lady I met last week, and she was like, She manages financial portfolios in a company, has a business administration degree, an MBA and stuff, but her spouse manages her money. And something she said struck me. She said, I go to sleep worrying about my finances.
Oh.
And I think that, that was what got me started on this path. So,
Mm.
but it is not complicated. I mean, if you look at the math, it's basic math we learn in elementary school. It's just that we
Mm-hmm.
have this, and we also think it takes a lot of time. I'm not going to deny that it might take a lot of time to set up in the beginning. So take it in small bite pieces. That's how I think of it. But once you set up, there's a lot of ways now with all the tools to automate it. When I started it, it wasn't so automated. So
Mm.
it just makes it so much simpler. And take it what matters to you. Don't listen to people's opinions. Oh, you should do this or you should do that. Do what is right for you and what is comfortable, because someone else's thing might stress you out more than what you're ready for.
I love how you're talking about taking the book in little sections and not feeling like you have to do this all at once, and not feel like it does have to take a lot of time. It's just kind of getting yourself comfortable with it. One of the things I see that you're passionate about is empowering students and women to achieve their financial goals. So the story you just mentioned about the woman that said she goes to bed every night and just worried about her finances. How about a story of somebody you've worked with, whether they're in getting ready to get out of college, or working maybe as one of your coworkers, or somebody else that is a female in the workplace that you've helped guide them as they're making some financial plans? Have you seen any kind of cool stories there?
Yeah, two different, completely different ends of the spectrum. So one is a very senior person that I knew, senior executive kind of level. This was a good friend. We'd have a lot of conversations about money. First of all, having conversations with your friends about money is very uncomfortable, I have to
Yeah.
tell you. And it's a thing that I've talked about, will and trust and legacy planning, which also is incredibly uncomfortable. But it's something that I've kind of, done with many people now, that it doesn't, I guess, irk me so much. And over many conversations, what happened is we were talking about retirement, planning this retirement early. And it comes down to, many of us may not look at our numbers. We don't know how much we have in our retirement account, how
Mm-hmm.
much we need. And there are some, like back of the envelope, simple calculations for us to think about it. So she was thinking she needed, an X number of $1 million to retire. And just from what I've seen, my experience, I was telling her, no, I don't think you need that much. You maybe need a third of it or maybe a fourth of it. And so I asked her that day to go look at, we'd been working through the finances to look at her numbers and run the numbers. And I kind of knew what she had because she'd already told me what she had. And so she ran the numbers, and we communicated an hour later, and I found out when she ran her numbers, she realized she only needed 25% of what she thought she needed, which is like a
Wow.
whole amount of relief, right? And she actually has that money already. Now,
Mm.
whatever she chooses to do, working, whatever her ambitions are, that is now, I think, a little more freeing, that it's a choice you make. Now you're
Mm-hmm.
not obligated, right? And this is something, I host a podcast as well, and I remember this financial advisor describing it like this: men think of money as a river, and what she's seen is women tend to think of money as a lake. And I thought that put
Mm.
it really well, because this is
Interesting.
something that we struggle with, right? We think once we turn the faucet off that the lake is going to dry up.
Mm.
But all, literature shows that people withdraw at like 4%, 6%, some percentage that you withdraw annually. The rest of the 90 plus, maybe in the first year, it will decrease over time, but it will continue to grow in the market. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
market will have swings, but generally speaking, it's not like you're going to empty this whole lake at one point. There is still money
Right.
that continues to do its job. And it's sort of shifting that mindset to think that it's not all at one point that everything stops. And I
Mm.
think reframing that is so important for us.
I think that is a good point, because you started at the beginning saying that you have a chapter in your book about mindset. And it's kind of like when you start your own business, you've got to have a really good mindset. And people don't talk about mindset that much. I mean, you hear about different kinds of mindset, but when you're talking about this mindset and helping this female executive get the mindset of, you've already got what you need, now what do you want to do with your life, kind of thing. and helping her make that paradigm shift. That's pretty powerful. Anything else on mindset work before we go to your next story?
It's also something for someone to think about. Like, when I talk to the other end of the story is someone who just started working, right? It's hard for us to do. I mean, we're obviously excited, incredibly excited when we get our first job, but I almost tell people now is look at the money you've got, what you're making, and break it down into all the expenses you're going to have. Because even making that first decision to rent a place, because maybe this is the first time you're renting a place of your own and you're really excited about it, is a financial decision, because it can be a really good move or it can really put a constraint on you, maybe eating out or something if you get a place that is not quite fit your budget. So, because there's all this thing, right? You have taxes, all of these things you've never had to worry about. Maybe you have a student loan, and just as unglamorous as it looks, sometimes the numbers tell you the story that you need to kind of think about. And I think once you set that up, it just takes a lot of pressure. I know it's been also a challenge sometimes working on that when, it's obviously when I say I'm a young person and I want to do this, and someone's telling me, maybe you should rethink about it. It's not the best of conversations and can be kind of challenging. And I've had to go through some of that, and it really helps for them to like process it and think about it. They have to make the decision, but kind of thinking about it, and then it's a conscious decision they make. But I think having the tools really makes it much easier. And maybe they choose to rent the place and, potentially compromise on something else that's not as important. Whatever is right fit for them. But it's important, I think, to have that picture as much as possible. Because the more we push away from not looking at this, I think it stresses us out. It may not be that the outcomes are anything that's going to stress us out, but it's just the image and the impression we have of it, right? I mean,
Right.
it's interesting. People I talk to sometimes, very senior people who are retired, who've done really well for themselves. This sort of, I might be eating cat food. It's like a sort of image that they have, and I think it's very hard to get rid of it. And it's just sort of conditioning over time.
Yeah. And I think it's getting themselves in the proximity of people like yourself or other people as they're coming out of college, getting into people that will help them be accountable for that kind of opportunity as they're growing. Let's switch over just a little bit in one of your other topics, which is just career transitions and helping females empower them through different career transitions. What has been the biggest lesson that you've learned as you're helping other women that you think is kind of a headline you're seeing right now as you're working with females in the workplace?
Two different aspects, right? One is I'm seeing many of them leaving the workplace because they're ready for a change, or like me, they're in a different stage of life. They want to explore different avenues. Some of it, obviously, we've seen a lot of statistics around COVID and burnout. So I think balancing this remote work and things kind of becomes a bit of a challenge. So thinking about what is important to you. And I do not want to make it sound simple or take away the hardships that people might have, right? You have to go to work, you need financial a nest. Obviously, I'm talking from a very different standpoint. I worked 20 years, so I'm in a different point in life. So you cannot compare my story and someone else's. But thinking about that and seeing if it's the right transition. I mean, I made a transition early on when I decided to be a stay-at-home mom for 3 years. So that also was a career decision and a financial decision. At that point, I had no idea whether I was going back to work, what I was going to go back as. It just happened that 3 years later, I went back to the same company when they asked me to come back to a similar role. So it worked really well. And the other thing also is I talk to people is about leadership. I started my podcast when I did it because I was in leadership roles and very senior executive roles, seeing that, how do women show up in the workplace? How do we speak up? Where do we find these resources that we need? And that's one of the things that I work with people or I talk about is as an immigrant woman coming to another country, and culturally we all have our differences. So, each culture has a way that you are taught how to show up. And for many South Asians, you may find this, or certain lot of cultures, or at least for me, is you may do really good work, but speaking up for yourself is kind of considered prideful. So it's very hard to navigate the space of finding this balance. And for me, it was like, how do you express your voice? How do you express your opinion and still create a space for yourself that you're comfortable with. And it took a while to transition, and I don't know quite what the trigger point was, but it was over many conversations, maybe some feedback I'd received on creating that space and showing up myself. I remember interviewing for this role, and senior manager asking me if she can give feedback, and I was like, sure. And she was talking about how I was showing up at work, and I was like, in my mind, I check my suitcase of who I am as a personality at the door, and I walk in the door. And I realized, well, that's actually not a good idea, because we're always, and maybe this is the representation of you're trying to fit into the workplace that you see, rather than create one that fits you as well. And speaking up, and we have to learn to speak up, because no matter how great work you do, it's never enough unless you tell people about it, because people will not know about it. And I think that's something people have to learn to do.
So you mentioned several things in there that I think are worth noting, and let us just kind of circle back around. One was that I love that you decided to take some time off when you had your kids, and you kind of took that just, we have these seasons, right? I did the same thing. You just kind of take a pause, and you're there for a while, and you don't know if you're going to go back to the same company, but you've got the opportunity to do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. The other point that you mentioned was being able to show up as who you are when you walk in, and not try to be somebody else. And especially, I can imagine just describing coming as an immigrant, coming with a different culture and a different background, and just trying to get in there and show up. Did you have a mentor, another female mentor, or somebody in your workplace that was kind of your sponsor that helped encourage you, give you feedback? We all need those people around us. Was there somebody that was really special for you that kind of helped lay the ground for you as you became who you were at the workplace?
There have been a lot of people who I've intersection with. Some have been women, some have been men,
Yeah.
both equally important. And earlier on, they were like through formal programs. Actually, one of them taught me the technique of information interviews, which I continue to use today. I think that kind of helped me figure out where I want to go in the workplace. So that was one of the first skills. Then one was about being courageous. That was around the time I was thinking about quitting work, and they were taking completely different moves from the way I was moving on how they were moving up the career ladder. It helped me reframe it. I had a friend who actually challenged me into why I was not going into management. I would have never thought about it. So it was just someone I knew for a long time. And, one day we ended up meeting for coffee along the hallway, and he was asking me what I was doing next. And I was like, oh, I've kind of hit this. Looking back, every 2-3 years, I would hit this point of ready for the next role, something more curious, something to learn. And I was looking, and he's like, why keep moving laterally? Why not up? And for me, the idea of management, and I hear this sometimes from others, is managing people. For me, the other thing is like these managers seem to know what they're doing. They have these ideas. I'm not sure I'm there. Sort of those things intimidated. But I went and thought about it for a few days, and came back and asked my boss, saying, "Hey, I would like to be a manager, someone like your role." And he was fantastic, because he kind of laid out saying, "Okay, these are the things you do. These are the things you need to do to be even kind of be considered."
Mm-hmm.
And you still have to do a lot of the legwork, but paving that way. And then I've had people sort of advocate and sponsor, like you said. And what I found interesting, and people may discover this in their own stories, is very often the people who are speaking up for you and who are sponsoring up for you are not necessarily the people you know. They might be people you've never actually directly interacted with. And I don't know whether they consider it sponsorship. I completely see it as sponsorship. So if someone calls me asking about, say, how is Dana, and I've never worked with you, but I know who you are in the workplace, I've seen how you show up, that is sponsorship in a way. That's actually what's happened to me when people have called someone else who I've never worked with them and given, and advocated for you. And that's sort of the space that they create. As they say, sponsorship is when someone's speaking your name when you're not in the room, and that is everything we can do for someone else.
So, you brought up a bunch in that, and I think first, let's start with the information interview. What did you learn about the information interview that you use to this day? Because I think our listeners will want to hear what that is.
Yeah, so that I'll give you a guidebook on how to do this.
Okay.
And I think for the most part, this works. So especially if you're inside a company, I always tell people send a calendar invite. Do not send an email to a person, because we get so many hundreds of emails, no one's going to look at it. Usually, that's what happens. But a calendar invite is very hard to ignore.
Yeah.
So if you're inside your company and you want to meet a leader, most companies nowadays have open door policies, so they're pretty much willing. So I would always send an email, a calendar invite with 1 or 2 lines saying, "Hey, I work in this organization. I'm interested in learning this." I would have done some research on the person or something about the organization. So I spent a year, soon after coming back to work, literally doing information interviews in every group. So I worked in manufacturing engineering, but I would talk to business, sales, planning, finance, because I didn't know where I wanted to go. Program management, like everybody. So I would send them, and then usually about an hour or so before, I either had a one-page PowerPoint quickly highlighting my points, or something that I wanted to show that I would put in their mailbox. And sometimes they printed it, but I had a printed copy. And that might be a conversation starter. You may use it, you may not use it. And I only sent it an hour before because I didn't want them to have too much time. First of all, people are going to forget because it might be weeks later, and just to digest it immediately. And then I would ask them about their journey, what they did, talk about a little bit about myself. Sometimes it was, I was scoping out jobs, right? I was not necessarily, even if they had a job opening, I might still do the information interview with not necessarily the intention of landing the job. Actually, at one point, someone did ask me if I wanted a similar job, but I had to think about it then. And if I felt like the vibe had gone well, found out something and it was interesting, kind of ended it with two things. One is like if there's any way I could help them, because they were also curious about what my role entailed. Maybe they didn't know about manufacturing, so it gave them a window into what the rest of the company did. And then the second thing is if it went well, if they suggested someone else, I would say, can you do the introduction? Or if they suggested I meet with somebody. Because if the introduction comes from someone else, so you can use someone else's name, obviously it opens more doors. And that really depends on how the conversation went. So say I was meeting someone in sales and marketing. The first time I talk to someone, I have no idea what the terms mean, what the job is, literally. And then by the time I hit the third person, now I have an idea of some of the language, more in-depth questions. I'm not scoping it out just to meet the person, but it's really also for myself to see, is this a good fit for me? Is this where I see myself in a few years? So that's kind of how it went. So the language also changed over time. And I think by the time I probably had an Excel sheet or something of all the different job profiles, what was there, and decided what I liked and what I did not like. And then I kind of later transitioned to using um, sort of the SWOT technique to think of what I wanted to do next. So that's kind of how I ended up using information interviews. And I still do that today.
I love that. When I hear that, I think of, oh, that's like networking in a way, your internal networking, but at the same time, you're going out and taking time to meet these people. And I love your tips about don't send an email, just send a calendar appointment, but give them the agenda of what you want to talk about, so they're not just like, what are we talking about? What am I spending my time? We hear from a lot of mentors that most of them wait for the mentee to come. They don't go out and get them. And I think there's that when you talk about the next topic you talked about was confidence. It's like, oh, I can't go reach out to these people, but this is a great way to do it and a great way to really network within your organization. So I bet you found through that you grew, I guess, and built an amazing network through that.
Absolutely. Actually, I got some stretch roles through that I didn't even know were available. They were not usually available to people in my organization, but someone, through this networking said, "Oh, do you want to do this?" I was like, "Absolutely," because it gave me an insight into a part of the company I would not have got otherwise, and sort of opened more doors and gave me more experience. So I realized from then on that I usually go and ask people for something, or if I'm not sure, I'll have a conversation. I feel like my career transitions of getting laid off and kind of taking that break as a mom changed my risk tolerance quite a bit. I realized, like, okay, you've already done this, gone through these sort of different experience and have come back to work successfully. I think that's what mostly scares us, right? What happens if something get laid off or get fired? But what we realize is there will doors that will open. And I didn't have the vocabulary then, but even the first time I came back, like at TI and all of that, came through a network. Like I had worked with the clients. They obviously had liked the work. They called and asked, "Do you want to come back as a contractor?" So I feel like we read this trail of breadcrumbs. We don't realize we are leaving. Now I know the words to use, but it is like network and, all of this allies that you leave in the place and people calling. So there will be people who are vested in your success. I mean, the person who called me back for work when I came back was a person I had briefly worked with. It was a very senior leader. I didn't actually think they knew who I was even in the first place.
Wow.
But obviously something sticks, and there are things like that, right? I had someone email me recently on LinkedIn, who I didn't actually work with, that engineer. He was very new, but I knew his boss and I knew what kind of work, because his boss would talk about. And he emailed me out of the blue on LinkedIn and said, "Hey, I'm looking for this role. I see this person's on your network. Can you connect me?" But because I knew enough, I felt comfortable connecting. So you never know where you're touching someone or where you're working, not along with them, but kind of on a similar path that you may have touched. And that's so important to remember.
I love that. And I think it's really, I like calling it information meetings because then it doesn't feel like, oh, I'm networking, but it feels like I'm gathering information. And from that, look, you got stretch roles, you've got all kinds of, as you say, breadcrumbs of people that will continue to stay in touch with you and help you as you grow. And I think that's one of the things, stepping out of corporate into your own business. Your network is your net worth, and how do you build that? And I think that there's not enough emphasis on that. And I think it's really in corporate, you're learning about how important the people are, but it's really the relationships. It's building all those relationships. So one last thing you mentioned that I want to make sure we talk about just a few minutes here before we close out is courage, and women in the workplace, and courage and confidence. What helped you build your confidence as you were, whether to reach out and do these information sessions or to step up for that? Was there something inside you that kind of started clicking, or was there things you were doing with your mindset? How did you get into, or even to step out and start your own business? What was that moment that you got that courage to do what you've been thinking about doing?
I think it's scary the first few times, right, when you do it, and then over time, I think when you learn, and I'm going to tell you, this thing doesn't go smoothly. Even there are days now when I do something and I'm like, "Oh man, I shouldn't have sent that email,"
Mm-hmm.
or you're cross-checking or questioning it, but actually you never know how the other person interprets it. So it's a
That's
lot
right.
of overthinking we do, I think, for ourselves. But it's about just trying it. And as I did more and more of the information interviews, obviously I gained more confidence around it. And networking around the same thing, talking to senior leaders, they're just as gracious if you have something of importance, something to share as well, and something that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I think it goes without saying that you have to do your job well, no, especially if you're in a corporation trying to grow your career, or even if you're running your business.
Right.
I think that's very implied, and so your work in some way speaks up for you. So when I suspect a lot of senior leaders, when they're meeting with someone who is a few steps down from them, is probably checking up on them when they're setting up a meeting. That's what I expect
Mm-hmm.
them to do in a lot of ways, because they have to vet who they're talking to, right? They may not know who they are, so they want to know something about this person maybe before they meet. So there's all of that. I think the most important thing is you will get a lot of no's, but don't take them personally.
Yeah.
It could be that they say no because really I think it's sometimes maybe because they're not ready to spend time with you, but that may not be the thing. They may have many other things that stop them from spending time. They may have other priorities, other things they're dealing with, but that gives you the opportunity to knock on someone else's door,
Mm-hmm.
try something else, and also not to be disheartened with it. It's okay. I think going back and re-asking and reframing, and as long as you bring something to the table. So mentor-mentee relationships, because I've obviously had mentors, I've mentored people, is a two-way street. You have to give something back, and it's not about just sharing your experiences.
Yeah.
It could be like, I talked to my mentor about board positions that I've seen that I think they would be a good fit for, or something that's working really well in my group, that I go back and say, when they ask for some problem solving technique, I'm like, this is something I've done or we've done, and this might be a good solution for you, or brainstorming on that. It could be many things. So it has to be a two-way street for
That's right.
it to work.
And I think just like the action, that's where I think the confidence comes. Is like you said, you kind of start doing some things and you start building some files in your mind of, I did that, I can do this now, and it's okay. As an entrepreneur, there's going to be things that just happen, and you just have to let them go, and like you said, just not let them get to you. So as we get ready to close out, Sirisha, is there anything that I haven't asked you that maybe is coming up for you right now that you'd like to share with the audience before we get ready to close out? Is there anything in particular that's coming up for you?
Absolutely. I mean, we've talked about this, and thank you for touching on this. So, I do speaking and workshops both at organizations and corporations and universities on. So, corporations and organizations, like I've done talks at SWE and Toyota and others, is around elevating women into leadership roles or building talent pipelines and building those leaderships. Because I myself was a leader, building high performance teams which got 25% of the people who were promoted. In a lot of instances there was 75% of them were women. So it's like it's not just from doing the speaking but from experience of having done the work itself. And then I work with universities, like I've done talks at Johns Hopkins and Carnegie Mellon. It's about bringing students into this corporate readiness and financial readiness, because obviously the school system and university system gets us all ready for the workplace, but there's sort of a pathway to navigate the corporate world, and I feel like we're never given that toolbox or that toolkit or roadmap, and this is a way to like engage and think, how do we get there? This is the picture I have in my mind when I think about it. There's a race, and I always feel like, why do I have to start at the back of the race? Why can't I be at the front of the race, knowing everything already? And any little bit helps. And so I work with these organizations to do this. And as we talked a lot about the book, there's the book itself, but there's a lot of like courses and other stuff going on that I'm actually working on right now to help people to process this on their own time, or if they're looking for mentoring, or whichever way that works for them on their thing. Because a lot of us are navigating this path. I've obviously had people who've supported my things as an ecosystem. So this is a lot of information. So the best way is to find me on my website, sirishakuchimanchi.com. I don't know if you want me to spell it out. Probably be in your show notes.
We'll
so
have
they
it in
can
the
probably
show
find
notes.
it there. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They're not going to remember how to spell it. So,
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think I really appreciate it. And I think I love the fact that you're working not only in corporate, but also helping students become corporate ready. And I just want to hear one thing. What do you think is the biggest challenge right now with these kids coming out of college and then being ready for corporate?
It is, I think, communication and presenting yourself, because the workplace is different. I've had different roles. So I've been a hiring manager in the company. I had new college graduates, interns. I was a recruiter at university. So I've like seen all the different gamuts. And of course, I've had young people, nieces, kids in my own ecosystem to see how they show up. And they obviously are very smart. They know how to do this. But I think it's that, like, how do you show up in a meeting? How do you have this conversation with your boss? What do you do to make the most out of these engagements? Especially if someone gives you the spotlight. Like, oftentimes in my own meetings, I would not present. I would have the engineers and my team members present, no matter whether they were new. And if they were doing the project, I wanted them to get the visibility. So how do they show up in front of senior managers? Because oftentimes what we forget is those first impressions stick for a very long time. It's like you're encapsulated in time. So it's very important how you show up. And so sort of navigating these paths of how do you present yourself? Because the audience is very different from till now who you've encountered, which was your crowd of peers in your, teens and early 20s. So it's a different sort of generational thing that you have to be cognizant of.
Yeah, and having that communication that's clear and concise, but yet, like you said, they'll remember. So it's a great tool for them to work on as they're getting ready to get into the corporate world. So Sirisha, thank you so much for sharing today. You just brought a lot of gold here to the group. We will put your link. We'll put all your information, how people can reach you, in the show notes. And I just want to wish you the best in your new opportunities, and excited to watch you on the journey. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dana. This was a lot of fun, and I wish everyone the best who's listening as well.
That's great. Okay, we'll see you guys next week, and thank you so much. Bye-bye.
You have been listening to Dominate Your Day podcast. If you're ready to transform your life and workplace from the inside out, go to danawilliamsco.com and set up a discovery call. We would love to connect with you and equip you with some helpful resources. Thank you for listening today, and please take a moment to subscribe to Dominate Your Day wherever you listen.